about Appium and how MoQuality has built a new tool for the Appium community. Our speaker today is Shauvik Roy Choudhary, who is the CEO and co-founder of MoQuality. Shauvik uh, got his PhD degree in computer science from Georgia Tech. His PhD research was focused on techniques for cross-platform testing and maintenance for web and mobile applications. It was during his PhD that the idea for MoQuality was born. Shauvik brings over 13 years of experience in the testing industry. He has worked at some of the major companies like Fullstory, Google, Fujitsu Labs, and Yahoo. He has delivered several talks at major academic and industry conferences. Most of the recent ones were at Android Summit and Google Tech Talks. So, without further wait, let me welcome Shauvik. Shauvik,
Thanks, Vaibhav. I'll take it from here. Awesome. Thank you guys for coming in. We see that we have a lot of familiar faces in the audience. So I really appreciate you guys taking your time from your day. So before we get started with the content, I'd like to do a small quick poll. So you guys should see this poll come in on your Zoom screen. So this is just to get an idea of where everybody is in their automation journey, and it will also help us to understand what kind of audiences we have. So each of you would also see what other people are interested in. So just take like a minute to go through the poll and give in your answers. And I'm seeing your results real time, and I'll share these results as soon as we get like a majority of people vote. Okay, I think we have a majority here. So let me bring the poll results on the screen. So these are the poll results. Essentially, we wanted to check, how many of you actually have automation tests, and many of you said that yes, you have tried, but don't run them regularly. That was the major, consensus. And then we asked, what is your expertise with Appium? And as we can see, majority of the audience, said that this is their first time with Appium. So that's great because that's why we are here. The third question was, if you use Appium, which language or framework do you prefer? And we see that a lot of people, selected JUnit Java, and many also selected JavaScript and Mocha. So since we have a lot of people who already have familiarity with Java, this webinar will be focusing a little bit on JavaScript, but we'll also have content which can be transferred over to other languages. And Python is as well another popular language. So this is very similar to what we have found. I think Appium itself is written in JavaScript. So new people who start with Appium, they start with JavaScript. We see that a lot of folks who come from web automation continue to use Java, and we've also seen Python as another popular language. So the last part was that if you are using or considering Appium, which of these is most challenging? And here we can see that there are so many challenges, right? So the first one was learning the Appium syntax, which 46% of people said that that was a challenge. The red ones, which is writing tests, like picking the best selectors for the action, that is 54% people said that. Test maintenance is also an issue, 46%. Running tests on real devices, of course, and finally test reporting. So we'll actually tell you about all of these, and in this webinar, we'll cover most of these things. So I'll just hit share results so that you guys can also see it on your screens. But let's get started. So, the title of this talk is, Appium Superpowers, right? So I think we basically should, talk about, address the big elephant in the room. Essentially, with any story, with you guys, this automation story, there's a villain and a superhero. The villain is actually the flaky tests, which are, like stopping you guys from doing automation. And the superhero is you guys, right? You guys are the quality engineers, and with the right tools, we can beat the villain. And the reason why flaky tests are such a big problem is that they actually stop us from actually adopting automation. So now flakiness is a term that was popularized by Google at their conference, Google's testing and automation conference. And what they meant by flakiness is that the same test, when you run it, sometimes it passes and sometimes it's failed. Right now, what we have seen is that flakiness is just a blanket term, that many testers would actually use when they don't know what's going on with the test, right? And in this webinar, we'll break down flakiness for you and show you guys how you can take control over your tests and kill this villain. So let's get ahead. Um, so what is Appium and why is it ideal for mobile automation? And on the right side, we wanted to show you guys that Appium is newer than Selenium. So when Selenium had a baby with focusing on apps, that's Appium. But essentially, a lot of people, that's what they think about, right? Selenium for apps. That's what Appium is. And it's popular because just like Selenium, it supports writing test cases in many popular languages. As we saw, Java, JavaScript, and Python are the three popular languages. The beauty of Selenium and Appium is that they are very black box in nature. So you don't need access to the source code, and testers or automation engineers don't need to set up the entire dev environment to be able to automate with Appium. All you need is the APK or the app binary, and there you go. You can start automating with Appium. And uh, essentially Appium, since it's black box, you're testing the app just like users would do it, right? So it's the almost like almost like manual testing, but instead of manually executing the app, you are actually using Appium APIs to send simulations to your app that's running on a real device or an emulator. And because of all of these reasons, we are seeing that Appium has been on the rise. A lot of QA teams are adopting Appium, and they're using it for testing of their mobile apps. So with that, background of Appium, let's go in and get our hands dirty and see, how we can actually use Appium. So before that, we'll actually go over, and understand how the Appium architecture works, right? So in Appium, there are like 4 components that you need to think about. Appium provides you a server, which actually connects with your phones and does the automation. Then you have an Appium client, which is what you would be using in, to send your commands to. So although the Appium server is written in JavaScript, your clients could be written in any languages, right? And then the server uses drivers, which are the different ways in which Appium talks to the phones directly. And while you're building a test, you also need a test harness or helper libraries. So in JavaScript land, this will be Mocha or Chai. In Java, it is JUnit or TestNG. In Python, it could be Python unit test or JBehav, right? So how do all of these things come together? And what we did is we try to put this picture around it, right? So essentially what happens is Appium tests, they use a test harness such as Mocha or JUnit. In there, you'll also have a client library, which will be written in the language of your choice. And what happens is this thing runs and it connects to the Appium host machine. So the Appium test could itself be running on the host machine. But what you could have is if you have another dedicated computer in your lab, or let's say if you're running a service in the cloud like Browser Stack or Sauce Lab, that will provide you an Appium service, right? So the Appium test and can run in a distributed fashion. When the test runs, what happens is the test actually sends an HTTP request, which is in the form of an Appium command. And then the server processes that command and it sends a request to the driver, which is responsible for connecting with the mobile device, right? And once the action is complete, then you get the response back from the driver, and the server sends an HTTP response back to the Appium test, right? Now, many of you guys are familiar with Selenium, so you might be wondering, how is it different from web testing or with Selenium? So, in Selenium, things are easier, right? You don't have another device here, which is the mobile device. What you have is, instead of the Appium server, you'll have the Appium, Selenium server. And what it does is it actually connects directly to the drivers that the browsers implement. So web testing is much easier because Selenium follows WebDriver protocol, which is a web standard, and it's supported by all the different browsers. But on mobile, there are these open source Appium drivers that we use, and it's the documentation sometimes that is outdated, sometimes just ready to hard to get started, and that's why we try to make it easier for you guys by creating Appium starters, and which I'll be covering later. But essentially, web testing is easier just because you don't have these three machines involved, right? On the right hand side, you don't have to deal with the idiosyncrasies of a mobile device, which is sometimes more challenging. So let's go ahead and look at what an Appium project looks like. So in an Appium project, you will typically have three things. You'll have your test case, right? And then which will be, in test.java or test.js. The tests typically have a setup or tear down, and I'll explain these when we go and jump into the tests. And the tests also have test steps and assertions. So test steps are things that do actions on the app. For example, click off a button, or they will do certain like swipe or scroll or input text. And assertions are things which are actually checking the state of the application and making sure that our app is, or our test is working on the app as expected. And Appium also has this concept of capabilities. So the first command that the Appium client sends to the server, it actually establishes a session, which starts a new session on a device for testing. So it is that is where when the start session command, you need to pass capabilities to Appium, which is essentially tells Appium what kind of test are we running, what kind of device are we using, and where to fetch the APK. So on the right hand side, you can see sample capabilities for Android and iOS. So on the top is Android. What you can see is that in the capabilities, which is typically a key value fair, this is coming from JavaScript, which is JSON format. But essentially, you're saying that platform is Android. My app is in this location. Here, what we are doing is we are actually linking to the a web location, and Appium will automatically download this URL and install it on your app. You could alternatively give it a local location. If you have it in the downloads folder, you can say home folder /download/apk, and Appium will do that as well. So as you can see, it makes it super easy for us to automate, because sometimes these URLs could be coming from a CI/CD. So let's say your CI/CD puts your APK in a bucket, you can take that direct URL and put it here. And then the next step is device name. So here, device name could be, currently we have device, which will pick any device. But if you say, let's say Samsung Galaxy S3 device or S7 device, then it will try to select that. And then the automation name is UI Automator 2, which is the default driver for Android. And then you can also pass app wait activity. By default, Appium requires you to give it an activity name. But what we have seen is that people who are getting started, they don't care about, they have a hard time finding these activities, right? So if you don't know the activity, you can just put star, and Appium will wait for any activity in your app to start. If you know the activity, you can actually give it, specify that as well. So this is Android. On iOS, it's very similar. We just change the platform name to iOS, platform version to 13.2. And by default, Appium uses simulators. So you can look at what simulators are available and put it here. If you and don't worry, if you put something wrong here, Appium is going to error out and it is going to give you all the options. So it's as easy as that. Automation name is XCUI test. XCUI test is a framework from Apple, and what Appium has done is they have built a driver around it. And similarly, we have the app, which is the IPA. Now notice that we have UIKit catalog.sim IPA, and that is because on iOS, the simulator and real devices, they actually use different architectures. Simulator runs on a computer, which uses x86, and iPhone uses ARM. So when your developer is giving you the IPA, you need to be specific to a simulator build or a real device build. So once you have covered this, right, like let me jump in and show you guys how Appium tests look like. So let me exit from the presentation. What we have done is in MoQuality, we actually have created starters. So you have 4 starters, two for JavaScript. One uses WD driver, and one uses the WebDriver IO, and Python and Java. So if you just click on download, you will be able to start with a boilerplate code example. We also have sample tests for many open source apps that we have written, just to show you guys examples. So for example, if I just try to click download, what it will do is it will show me a command to get the boilerplate, and in a few seconds, it will show me where this is on GitHub. So if I go to GitHub, you'll see this page where we have these open source samples for all the different boilerplates and samples for apps. So for example, today's webinar will be using Google I/O. So Google I/O is an app from Google. Let me show you how the app looks like. I'm going to use strcpy. This is an open source tool. What it does is it shows what is on my phone. So what you're seeing is my phone screen. And essentially, this is an app for Google's I/O conference, which they have yearly. So this is I/O 2019. And what you can see is that it has home, schedule for the conference, the agenda for the conference, and so on, right? So this is the app that we will be using today for our automation. Um, by the way, if you guys have any questions, you can use the Q&A section of Zoom to ask questions, and we'll try our best to answer it during the talk or at the end. So now that we know a little bit about the app under test, let's go and see how we can automate it. So first, let me show you guys this. What I'll do is, here's a little trick. So if you have Visual Studio Code installed, you can just do code star, and you will be able to see everything in here. So I'm in the starters folder. So let's see, get remote dash v. This says that this has been checked out from starters. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do code dot, so that it opens this entire thing in Visual Studio Code. So what we are seeing is that these are all the different samples. So inside the Google IOWD, what we have is we have this test.js, which is our test. And as we can see here in the test, we have a before. This is typically called as setup in Python and Java. And after, this is also called as tear down. So essentially what before and after do is, before our test starts, the before will run, and it will actually create a new Appium session with this capability. And after the test ends, it will actually close the driver or quit the driver. And a test looks something like this, right? A test has different steps. So get started has this step, which has this selector, and on this selector we are selecting an element and then doing target.click. Now if you find this too confusing, don't worry, we are going to go into how we are actually going to create this test. But now that we have this test, right, we have the getting started test, which clicks on getting started. We have the swipe to home screen test, and then we have a check schedule test. Check schedule is the same as clicking on and seeing the schedule. So what we'll do is, let's just quickly run this and see what happens. So this is MoQuality, and as you can see in the apps, I have the app uploaded. I will go into the, we have a section for the debugger, and we have a section for runs. Runs will show historical runs. Now it's empty because it's a new account. And debugger will show you exactly how you can debug and record runs. So let's go into the debugger. And what we'll do is, we'll just go back to Google I/O WD. And let's just start the debugger here. So what you see is that it is all MQ Lab is automatically starting the Appium server for us. And if you go back to this page, you see that there is selecting this directory. So essentially, you're confirming that, hey, you want to select this directory and you want to run this test, right? So what it is doing is it is running the test, and in the terminal, and on the device, if you want to see, it's actually running the test. So I will just start strcpy, cpy, and what you'll see is that on the device, it's actually automating and running the test, right? So this is happening on the device. This could also be happening in the cloud, right? So how do I actually see what's going on real time? I cannot run strcpy with browser stack or something on the cloud, right? So what we do is we actually provide this interface to you, where you can see real time what is happening with the test, right? And this is debugging, because this is understanding why your test is passing or failing, and this helps you get more insights in the testing that is happening. I've quickly showed you, a little bit of this. Let's jump back to the presentation and, continue. Right. So essentially, when we, talk to folks, right, we found that, and as also seen in this webinar, we found that the test automation, like there are like some certain issues, getting started with, right? Like the first big issue is, that it's difficult to write test cases, because essentially what you're doing is you're taking human interactions and converting them to code, right? So we found that there was, need for assistance in that. The second, which was a bigger one, is tests are very difficult to maintain, right? Once a test fails, how do you know which test is broken? And if a test is broken, why did it break, right? Um, and once we understand the problem, how do you fix the test? Do you have to rewrite the entire test, or can you just edit a step, right? And it is this that leads to a lot of teams not adopting automation. And what we've seen is that the challenges, could be because of either there's a bug in the app, or the device is, on which we are running test is not compatible with the test app itself, or the test framework, or the app is actually updated but our test is not updated, right? So our test is outdated, that's why it is failing. Or in general, the tests are flaky, right? So these are certain conditions in which our tests don't work, and it's really hard to find out which one of these it is. So now let's see how MoQuality helps you automate these or solve these problems, right? We already saw that we give you boilerplate and samples for getting started, and with that, it makes it super easy to get started. But then we are talking about incremental test generation, right? So essentially what you want to do is you want to own your code. So let's go in here and see what our test again is, right? So our test is check schedule. And if you go back to how we ran the test, essentially the check schedule test is these 4 steps. What it does is it goes to the home screen, it finds the first image button, which is this button that you see, the hamburger icon, and then it clicks on that, and what you see is that it gets to home, right? So it did click on the image button, and we provide you this before after on top. So you can see before the click, this was the state, and after this click, this is the state of the application. And this is on the right hand side. What you're seeing is you're seeing a visual hierarchy of your app, and you're seeing the different steps that you can create here. So at this point, if you want to create a step, you can select stuff here. But now let's see what the next step is. So what we did was we then said, we wanted to find the first menu item and click on it. So essentially we clicked on, let's go back to the test. What we are seeing is that this is the first item that we are clicking on with text schedule, right? So this is we clicked on the schedule thing here, right? Once we click on the schedule thing, we actually came here, right? So if you want to again see before after, you can go back and see before after. So before clicking schedule, we were here. After clicking schedule, we are here, right? Now we see that we get this pop-up or dialog which has this thing called as got it. So what if we want to actually click got it? So what we'll see is that we'll select this action, or we'll select this element, and then what it allows us is it shows us on the right side what it would be to do an action with this particular element. So we can select this element with text is got it. It says that, okay, the resource ID for this is ID button 1. Normally IDs are better, but in this case, since my text is more specific than button 1, I'm going to select text and remove this, right? One thing to notice is that at the bottom here, as I change things, as I change selectors, my code is getting updated, right? So this is what we mean by incremental test step generation. So what we are doing is we are incrementally building one by one step and giving it to you, giving you the code so that you can take and paste it in your code base. And this you can do not only for WD Node.js, but also for all the different languages. For example, this is how you would do the same action in Python, or you would do the same action in Java. Um, so let's go back here. Let me also show you the different actions we support. So by default, it's click, but you could do a tap. On the screen, you could do other actions. If it was an input widget, like a text box, then you could also do text. It's giving me a warning that it's not. You could do also scroll and assertions and so on, right? But for now, let's just do click. So what I'm going to do now is copy this line of code. I could have also hit this button to copy. And now I'll go here and I'll paste it right here. So what it's now doing is it's selecting that button with the text got it, and then it's doing a click on it, right? So now let's run this again in the debugger and see what happens here. So what I'll do is I'll clear these steps. So my screen is empty, and then I'll just hit run test again. And I can go and see that my debugger is still running. So I can just hit run test in the same folder. And what it'll do is, as you are seeing here, it's started to run the test, right? And what happened at the start is that, you know, the first get started failed. And this is exactly why automation is hard, because what happened was the app was not restarted again, right? So if we didn't restart the app, uh, we actually saw this screen instead, right, of this screen. And that was because, the Appium was already running. We just, used the same session. But you guys get an idea, right? On this step, on the first step, I was expecting to see something else in get started, and instead I saw this, and that's why that test failed, right? So what you can see is that you can see inspect the entire hierarchy and see why this step failed. But my test runner didn't stop right there. It actually kept going on, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop my debugger because I wanted to restart a new session, and then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to clear this steps. And
Hey, hey Shavik, we have a
yes,
question from Tim.
cool.
So you were showing the code generation part, the flexible
Yes.
code generation in different languages. So Tim has a question. He's asking, is this directly related to own the code, that is either access to the code from third-party vendor or in-house code? So can you show that part again?
Sure. So essentially, what code we are talking about here is the test automation code. So let's say, one of the advantages of Appium, as we mentioned, was that you don't need access to the vendor code, right? So it's black box. So all we are showing here is the automation code that will exercise the app under test. And this is not the code from the vendors. I know Tim personally, that's why sort of I'm guessing, and I'll give the audience where he's coming from. So his company actually engages several vendors to build apps, right? And often these vendors will give you an app binary, which is the APK or the IPA, right? Or they'll upload it on test flight and give the app directly to you. So you don't have access to the source code. And sometimes it can be challenging to set up the source code because this vendor could have so many dependencies that they're using, and it's not worth the time. And that's why Appium is so popular, because you don't have to get access to the app source code. And what we are showing you here is the test source code, which is something that you can actually use MoQuality to build test scripts, and that is the source code that we are talking about here. And all the examples in the starters actually deal with test source and not the app code source. Does this answer your question, Tim? I think the answer is yes. Otherwise, please let us know. Okay. Awesome. So let's get back to where we were. So we are in MoQuality. We are in, let's see, it's not running here. Okay, great. So we'll just start the lab again, MQ debug. Um, yeah, so we'll select this directory, and now this is ready. So we'll run the test. So now that we've started from scratch, we hope that our test will now run because it's reinstalling the app, and it's trying to click on get started. So let's give it a few seconds for Appium to initialize. And as we can see here, the stat test has just started. And so it found this, right? So the second time you launch the app, you would not find this, and that's why it that test had initially failed. But as we can see, right, it helped us understand what the problem was and get through it. So now that we are here, um, we did find the first, and then we clicked on it, right? So this was where our last step ended. We incrementally added one extra step to find the got it button and click on the got it button. So before we clicked on the got it button, this was the screen. After we clicked on it, this is the screen, right? So this is how we incrementally added it. Uh, we incrementally added a step. Now let's go ahead. So what we showed you quick was, how you can incrementally add steps. Uh, so one thing that we also allow is, we give you visual test reports. So now when your tests are running in the CI/CD, you actually don't have like a debugger available, right? So how do you run it? So essentially, let's get and talking about CI/CD. So in the DevOps workflow, this is how the workflow looks like. What you have is you have your developers putting in code to your app, and then the app gets built, and the app is the binary is sent, right? So what we could do is we could add these two lines, which is upload your app APK or the app binary, not the source code, and then MQ record. What this run does is it runs the tests, if you on your local device or on the cloud. So if you do dash dash cloud, it will find a cloud device and run it there. If you have a local device connected to your CI/CD system, you could skip this and you could run it on the local device as well. But then once this runs, you get confidence that your app is running, and then you deploy or distribute to your users and keep iterating, right? This is the regular DevOps workflow. So let's quickly see how this thing happens on MoQuality. Um, so let's get here. So by the way, from the debugger, if I wanted to save this session, I could also click save run. And what would happen is this would appear in runs. So if I go to runs, I can see exactly what the test did. And this is the visual report that we generate for you. You also have logs where you can see the textual logs of the test. But the visual report gives you exactly what happened in the test at each step. So for example, clicking on the getting started button took you to the home screen, right? And now we'll see how do you do this same thing from your CI/CD or from just command line without actually using the debugger. So now let's close this. Okay. So now what we have is we have the test here. And now instead of, we did MQ debug before, instead of MQ debug, we can use MQ record. So what are the different options that MQ provides us? If you do MQ-H, you will see. So, starter will, download a starter, upload will upload your app. We saw debug already, and record records our test. So we just want to run the test and record it, right? So MQ record, that's all we'll do. And uh, so as you can see, this requires an API key, especially if you're running it in your CI/CD, it doesn't know which account to put it under. So what we'll do is we'll just go in here and get our API key. If I go to my account, I can see this API key here. So let's go back. Let's go to the webinar project that we were in. So what I'll do is I'll set this API key so that MoQuality knows which account it belongs to. And you will have your own API key, so please don't copy this on your machines when you're later watching this webinar. And then let's just run MQ record. So it automatically logged me in with the API key, and it's now running the test case. And what it says is that you cannot change the sample app. So here, if you just look at how MoQuality works is that we have this mq.json file. So let me go back to the code editor and look at this JSON file. What this does is it has a project sample, right? In my case, I have my project as webinar. So I'll take this project and I'll put it here. And that's how MoQuality will know which project to save it under. So it saves under my account, but webinar project. So now let's go back and run this MQ record. So once this finishes, what I'll see is that, my test will run and all the data will be available in the runs. So right now we go to runs, we only see one run, which was 3 minutes ago. The test is actually happening and running on the local phone that I have, since I didn't do dash cloud. I can show it to you that the test is running. So this was the test that was running, and now the test is complete. And my phone is again in the default position. So this test is done, and we can see that it posted the result here, and runs/2 is available. So if you are running this in your CI/CD, it will run these test cases. Your CI/CD will get this output that all your tests passed. And if you want to see more details, you can actually click this link. So I can command click this link directly, which will take me to the view, or I can come here and go back to the runs and see that. Let me just copy this link and paste it here. So this is the second run 2, and that run also did the same thing. So this is how, if you just run the test case in the cloud, and if something fails, you can actually go in here and see what failed. Now, what we can see is that, this thing, ran this test and, it clicked on got it. So let's simulate a condition where it will definitely fail, right? So I would say that with text, something like this, right? And let's see, how this would work. So I will again do MQ record. And this would generate a test case, and let me generate a test run and report it. So it's running the test again. So it's on the got it screen, and it can't find it, right? So now I can see that my test is done. It runs 3. So let's take this link, let's paste it here, and we should be able to see that, hey, it wasn't able to find abracadabra on the screen, of course, because it was not there. And I can, this is how we make understanding test results much easier. Now I can take the same thing again and run it in debugger. So saying that Appium is running already on this port. Let's go back to debugger. Okay, so the debug is ready. Okay, so select it and we run the test. So yeah, so it has started running the test, as we can see here. And voila, it's running the test right now. So in the debugger, I can see like more details on the right-hand side to actually inspect the app. So it's running right now. And yes, it failed. So it said that I couldn't find abracadabra on the screen. Now I can actually inspect the whole page and then see that, hey, this is the button I was trying to click. And what is the text of this button? It has got it. It's not abracadabra. So I'll change this. I'll copy this step and I'll paste it back. But since this was a simulated failure, we know the solution is just to replace this with got it, right? So this is how easy we make it to understand test results and go ahead and generate a fix. So what did we see? So we saw that, with we basically with MoQuality, we directly jumped in and we basically were able to use this visual UI inspector. We had before and after steps so that we understood exactly what each step was doing. and with that we were able to understand the test. There was also logs available down below, which I didn't show you, but if you wanted to see Appium logs or test logs, they will be available here. So you can see, exactly the test logs that are available, and this helps you, but also the visual interface helps you in understanding and fixing the problem. Okay, so how do you fix bugs, right? So there are a couple of issues that could happen. Maybe the developer changed the name of the button, or and you want to update the button, or if a new widget has come on the screen, right? So essentially what we would do is we will change that action by selecting the new action on the screen, generating a step for that, and adding it. So if your widget has changed, you just change the selector. If you have alternate actions that need to be done, for example, if a new dialog comes in and you want to click on it, so you would just like we clicked on got it, you would click on buttons and generate that additional step. And another thing that I did not focus on was that while we were selecting these different selectors, we actually try to give you robust selector recommendations. So as we know that IDs are always better, it would default to ID, right? And you can, but the thing is that it makes you suggestions, right? So for example, what if I did button? If in this case there's only one button on the top, but let's go to another case again. Okay, I just lost the state. But essentially what happens is if you change these things, you would see similar widgets as changing. So if there are, let's say on this screen there are several options, you would see this number increase, um, the similar widgets one. So what it does is it gives you recommendations by selecting these options automatically for you, but you can play around with this and see how many elements it's selecting on the screen, and also generate the most optimal code. And that's how it gives you robust selector suggestions. But at the end of the day, you have the power to make this choice to select whichever is the best selector for your app. So in summary, what we showed you was how to get started with Appium, and we also showed you how our tool works. What we believe is that your tech team will use this to generate optimized test snippets that could be put in the code. We also showed you how easy it is to debug test cases. So if something goes wrong, instead of spending hours or days trying to find the problem, you can just use the visual debugger to understand and fix the problem. And also, for each test that runs in CI/CD or anywhere, we provide you visual test reports so that you can understand the problem and maintain it. For the business team, other than the tech team, essentially what they are saying is that their devs are not spending too much time in testing. It's increased their productivity, and they see a better ROI. So with this, what I'll do is, I'll open it up to questions. I see that there are some questions coming in, and I would also want to guys to encourage you guys to sign up for a free account. What we did was we realized that what we have built is so valuable that we don't want to keep it from folks from trying. So please go ahead and sign up for a free account at MoQuality to try our tools and to get access to all of these things that we showed. Um, so at this point, I'll open it up for questions. I see that there are a couple of questions coming here already. Um, Somebody asked whether the recording will be available. Yes, we'll make the Zoom webinar recording available. We're also creating more tutorials and videos. So we'll share all of that with you guys. Another question was, so Tim is asking that how does the product owner QA team use this to prioritize or fix issues, right, or defects. So essentially, I'll go back to the screen where like what is the issue, right? Like finding and talking about in issue triaging, right? Like understanding the issue. What is the issue? Is the issue in the app, or is the issue in the test, right? So the first one is bug in the app. That's great if we could find the bug in the app. The good thing was that we already have these visual reports that I showed you guys. So you can take that visual report, share it with your developer, and they know exactly know what's wrong and they can fix it, right? Also, this diagnosis helps you understand, you know, the severity of the bug, right? Because we show you this visual, the test flow. So as a product owner or business owner, you understand why a test is failing and what is the flow that leads to a test step failing, right? So with that, you can correlate that with your business goals and see, is it breaking an important user flow, right? So and if that is the case, then that will help you understand and fix the problem. The beauty here is that if it's the last three options, which is device compatibility, then it tells you that your test case doesn't run on certain devices or your app is doesn't not supported on certain devices. So is that device important for you? You can then go into Google Analytics or Firebase Analytics and see how many of your users use that specific device. And if it's a major number, then you prioritize it higher, right? Outdated tests and flaky tests is, again, these are not for these are not for your app, but for your tests, that your tests are outdated. And the good practice for keeping your tests updated is that tests are essentially giving us signals of how good our app is, right? So if we look in the DevOps pipeline, if our tests are outdated or they're flaky, they're not giving us enough feedback about our app. So MoQuality helps you quickly get them in shape, and so that your DevOps pipeline does not stop or get delayed in the test step. I hope I answered your question.
Share the reports with the team. You can download the report and share it with Slack, or that could help the team with prioritizing the issues.
Exactly. So one thing I didn't show you was, this test step failed. So you could share this link with your team, and everybody would be here, and they would see, what the problem is. So a fix could be just, updating, the step, or it could be more involved. Um, Another thing you can do is, if you're inside the debugger, you can also download a report here, which gives you an HTML report with all the different screenshots. So that is another thing that we have seen teams use to download these artifacts and share it with the different support teams and development teams.
We have another question from Josh. How do you handle flakiness in the CI/CD pipeline?
That's great. So flakiness, again, is because of several things, right? Like it could be that the app is non-deterministic, right? Essentially the flakiness is a property of a test, right? Which means that the test is flaky, which means that it needs to handle some things in a more reliable fashion. So one of the biggest reasons for flaky tests is unreliable selectors. So if your selectors are poor, so for example, in this case, if you selected a selector which just picked based on um, the type of this element, which is menu item text. Now we know that this is the second menu item text, but if there's a new menu item text which comes in front of it, it would break this test, right? So picking good selectors or picking robust selectors is actually very, very helpful in making sure that your test is not flaky. So this helps you with that. And what essentially we are doing is, if your tests are running repeatedly again and again, then you could understand which tests are flaky, because flaky tests by definition, they pass sometimes, they fail sometimes. So if you run the same test again and again on the same build, then what you see is that you would see the same test go red and green, right? Essentially in bigger companies that we work with, what they have is they run each test case several times. So instead of running the test case once, they say that run this test case 5 times. And in Mocha that we were showing, there is actually an option to do retries. So you can actually say this dot retries, and then retries is equal to 3. And what it'll do is, if a test fails, it will retry that test again and again 3 times, right? So that is one way in which we have seen people combat flakiness. Of course, running a test multiple times makes it slower, but at least you get good results, so that you're not getting disturbed by noise.
We have another question from Roma. She's asking that if the build is updated by the dev team, and as a QA team member, can you just replace the build and run the same tests again? And what happens if in the new version some of the element locators have changed? Then how do you update the test?
That's a great question, right? So essentially, what we do with MoQuality is that if you go to apps, you can actually go in and get the latest app here. So even if your developers are updating apps to MoQuality, if you point to latest, this will always be the latest, right? So you don't have to worry about pointing to the separate app version. And by the way, your developers could be adding the app by just putting the APK IPA file here or using the CLI tool. This is what I said, they could put this in their CI/CD. So every time they have a new version of the app, it automatically comes here. And if you use this link in your test case, then this will always point to the latest version of the app, and you don't have to worry about updating this. But otherwise, what you would have to do is you have to go in and change this to point to the latest version of the application. To answer the second part of Roma's question is that, do we need to update selectors? And the hard answer is yes, right? If your app is updating, your test always needs to be updated. And the good thing is that if you have CI/CD set up, then hopefully the changes you're making are not massive, right? Your developer makes a small change, then you update your test case to that, right? And this interface, the debugging interface, gives you all the tools that are necessary to understand and fix the problem. So instead of updating the entire test, you would just copy one step and paste it in your code. So just like we showed here, what is this? So instead of changing the entire test, you would see that a specific step is broken. So you would generate this code, or you would just update the selector that you see here, right? So it depends on how much the app changed, and doing it regularly with CI/CD, it's like a healthy practice, right? If you wait on it too long, if you're not running your test case for, let's say, a month, and your developers made a lot of changes, then of course that is a lot of work. But let's say your tests run more regularly in CI/CD fashion, then hopefully the changes that are coming in are small deltas, and it makes it super easy for you to update it. I hope that answered your question, Roma.
Okay, we do have a couple of more minutes. Any more questions from our audience? After the webinar, we will be sharing the webinar recording, and we'll also share a link to a demo video, which would be like a short video that you can follow along and create and debug your tests. Please feel free to create your new accounts by going to the link app.moquality.com/sign up.
Awesome. So if there are no questions, I'll show this link again. You could just go to moquality.com and sign up on our homepage as well. But this is the link, app.moquality.com/sign up to get your free account with MoQuality.
Also, we have a small request. After the webinar, you will be redirected to a small survey. It's just 4 simple questions. If you could please answer that, that would really help us.
What we are trying to do here is we are trying to create materials for you. So if you guys think that the next webinar we do, if it would be good to focus on certain things, please let us know. We'll try to make it as helpful to you as possible. So your feedback helps us get better. So thank you guys for attending. If there are no more questions, I'd like to give you back 3 minutes of your time to enjoy, to get that sip of coffee in the morning, or at night for our people from India. So thanks for joining, guys. This was our first webinar for MoQuality for Appium, and we hope to do more of these in the future to show you guys what we are building. We do have a popular Slack channel, which is slack.moquality.com. You can find a link at the bottom of our website as well. Please join on Slack and ping us if you have any other questions or feature requests, or if you are need help getting started. That's it. Thank you, guys. Thanks for coming.
All right. Thanks, everyone.